Why is it that the men who give the most, who try the hardest, are the ones who end up ignored? You think you're doing everything right, texting back instantly, making her laugh, listening to every word, showing her she matters, and yet, somehow, she drifts. She stops replying as fast. She pulls back. One day, she doesn't even try anymore. And here's the truth that stings. It wasn't because you weren't good enough. It was because you made it too easy. Human desire doesn't grow where certainty lives. It grows in the shadows of mystery, unpredictability, and restraint. That's the paradox most men never learn. The more you perform to be liked, the less magnetic you become. Let me paint the picture. Ethan was 33, smart, steady job in IT. He'd been called such a good guy more times than he could count. He read self-help books. He memorized body language tricks. He studied conversation starters on YouTube. He thought he was prepared for any interaction. But when he met Mia at a cafe, all his preparation crumbled because desire isn't logical, it's instinctual. She didn't need to analyze his words. She felt the truth within seconds. He smiled too quickly when she teased him. He texted again before she replied once. He agreed with her just to avoid conflict. He laughed at jokes that weren't funny. And she knew. Not because she was cruel, not because she didn't value kindness, but because she could sense he was giving himself away before she even asked. By the end of the night, she was polite, she was friendly, but she was done. Ethan, meanwhile, kept talking, kept filling the silence. Because to him, silence was dangerous. Silence felt like slipping away. But here's the paradox. His fear of losing her attention was the very thing that made her lose interest. You see, the moment you start chasing approval, you become readable, predictable, replaceable. And predictability doesn't spark obsession, it suffocates it. Approval feels good in the moment, but it's like building your foundation on sand. One shift, and it collapses. The man who leads with, "Do you like me?" is already beneath her. The man who holds back, who doesn't rush, who can stand in silence without fear. That man creates tension, and tension is the birthplace of desire. Think about it. How many conversations have you ruined by over-explaining? How many times have you killed the spark by rushing to fill the gap, when what she actually needed was to wonder? Because real power isn't in how many words you can throw at someone. It's in how comfortable you are with saying less. Ethan thought fast replies made him reliable. They only made him available. He thought agreeing made him easy to talk to. It made him forgettable. He thought politeness would spark intimacy. It only created boredom. Mia didn't need another answer. She needed to feel something she couldn't control. And real power, real presence. It doesn't rush. It doesn't beg. It doesn't bend. It allows the world to lean in or walk away. And both are fine. That's the lesson most men never learn. They think they need better lines, better strategies, better words. But what they really need is better silence. Because when you stop rushing to prove yourself, when you let the pause breathe, when you're okay with not explaining yourself, the entire dynamic shifts. People start leaning in. Not because you're louder, but because you're unshaken. And here's the shift. If you want her to feel desire, not just appreciation, you have to stop talking to win her approval. You have to stop performing. You have to let the silence do the work. Why most men kill desire before it begins. There's a cruel irony in dating that almost no man sees until it's too late. It's this. The very things you think will make you wanted are the exact things that erase desire before it even has a chance to grow. Most men believe that if they're agreeable, polite, endlessly supportive, then they'll be chosen. But the truth? Every time your words sound like a request for acceptance, you kill the tension that fuels attraction. Because attraction doesn't live in comfort, it lives in friction. Adrian was 29, worked in logistics in Toronto. He wasn't rich, but he was solid, dependable, kind. The kind of man who always said, "I'm here if you need me." He believed kindness would earn intimacy. So, he gave everything. He texted back in seconds. He laughed at every story, even the ones that weren't funny. He told her, "Whatever makes you happy, I support it." And here's what happened. One rainy night, after driving her home, she looked at him and said a simple, "Thank you." Then she walked away. No hug, no glance back, no spark. Adrian sat there in his car, the engine still running, the rain tapping against the windshield. Not angry, not devastated, just empty. Because he felt it. That invisible line he had crossed. The line between being appreciated and being desired. She appreciated him, but she didn't want him. That's the difference most men never see. Appreciation feels safe, but it is not the same as desire. And the harder you try to earn someone's affection through selfless availability, the more predictable you become. Predictability isn't love. Predictability is boredom. So why does this happen? Because when you give too much too soon, you strip away the very thing her ego craves. Uncertainty. The human mind doesn't obsess over what it fully owns. It obsesses over what it doesn't fully control. And here's where men fail. They think showing loyalty first will make her loyal back. But loyalty without tension isn't intimacy. It's suffocation. She never asked Adrian to be her emotional servant. He volunteered. He gave away his mystery before she had a reason to earn it. And in doing so, he killed desire before it could even breathe. Imagine this. You're watching a thriller movie. If the director spoils the ending in the first 5 minutes, would you stay interested? No, because curiosity is gone. That's what happens when you over-explain yourself. When you comfort too quickly. When you say yes to everything without letting her wonder what you'll say no to. You've given away the ending. And once she knows the ending, she stops turning the pages. So, here's the uncomfortable truth. Your kindness might be the very reason she stops craving you. Your honesty might be the reason she feels certain, too certain. Because the ego doesn't want certainty, it wants the chase. Let me give you a sharper story. Jake was 31, steady job, friends respected him. He was thoughtful, articulate, emotionally intelligent. But with women, he made one fatal mistake. He thought sharing everything about himself was connection. So, on his second date, he opened up about his past heartbreaks, his childhood struggles, his life goals, his vulnerabilities. He thought he was being real, authentic, transparent, but she wasn't leaning in. She was pulling away. Why? Because when you put your whole heart on the table before she's invested, you don't look genuine. You look available. And availability without tension isn't attractive. It's forgettable. Here's the shift you must understand. Desire doesn't grow from words. It grows from space. From the silence between the words. From the pauses that make her wonder. Most men rush to fill that space with comfort. They think silence will scare her off. But silence, used with presence, creates curiosity. Think about the last time someone paused after you asked them a question. That tiny moment of waiting probably made you lean in, right? That's what desire feels like. It's born in the waiting, in the wondering. So, what's the antidote? Don't rush to give peace she hasn't earned. Don't hand out loyalty before she's invested. Don't explain yourself until there's nothing left to discover. Instead, say less. Hold your frame. Let her wonder what you're thinking, not because you're playing games, but because you actually respect your own silence. Because silence, when it comes from strength, not fear, is louder than any compliment. Adrian's mistake was that he thought intimacy was built through constant reassurance. But intimacy isn't built that way. It's built when someone feels pulled into your orbit, not when you throw yourself into theirs. What if the very way you show love, endless availability, constant reassurance, is the reason she stops feeling desire? What if being too emotionally generous is what makes you invisible? Because here's the paradox. Women don't crave what they already own. They crave what they can't fully define. And the man who can let a question go unanswered, who can sit in silence without collapsing, who can say no without apology, he doesn't kill desire. He fuels it. So, here's your shift for today. Don't try to impress with more words. Don't rush to comfort when she hesitates. Don't reveal every thought the moment you feel it. Instead, let the silence sharpen you. Because when you stop begging for approval, you stop being forgettable. And when you stop being predictable, you stop killing desire. And that's when she begins to feel something she can't explain. That's when the chase begins. The men who awaken desire. Here's the truth most men don't want to face. Desire isn't created by trying harder. The men who awaken it don't chase, don't flatter, don't bend themselves into approval-seeking shapes. They don't ask for permission before they speak. They don't crumble under silence. And that's exactly why they are unforgettable. Caleb was 36, a financial consultant in Chicago. He wasn't the best-looking man in the room, and he knew it. But when he walked into a dinner party, people still noticed. Not because of his appearance, but because of his presence. He didn't try to dominate the conversation. He didn't shower anyone with compliments. He didn't scramble to prove his worth. He asked a single question, then let the silence breathe. And when she, Lena, magnetic, beautiful, used to men collapsing under her charm, tested him with a sarcastic jab, he didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly, smirked, and said, "That was cute." Then he paused. That pause unsettled her. Not because it was rude, but because it was unpredictable. He didn't apologize. He didn't rush to explain himself. He didn't fill the silence with nervous laughter. He let her sit in it. And in that stillness, something shifted. She felt the presence of a man she couldn't fully define. You see, most men enter an interaction like salesmen. They pitch themselves, explain themselves, adjust themselves to fit into whatever mold they think she'll like. But the men who awaken desire, they don't pitch. They frame. They lead with calm. They hold their opinions even when they clash. And they let their indifference to outcome speak louder than any performance ever could. That's what Lena felt in Caleb. Not his charm, not his wealth, not his effort. She felt the tension of a man who could not be emotionally steered. And that tension grew into obsession. Think about it. When was the last time someone didn't react the way you expected? Didn't play the script you thought they would? Didn't give you the answer you were prepared for? Didn't it stay with you longer? Didn't you replay it in your mind? That's the psychology of desire. It lingers in unpredictability. Caleb didn't do anything extraordinary. He just didn't collapse. He didn't chase. He didn't fill every silence with proof. And that made Lena's ego restless. Because when a woman meets a man she can't emotionally control, her mind doesn't relax. It obsesses. Here's the mistake most men make. They think if they're kind enough, attentive enough, expressive enough, she'll finally choose them. But obsession isn't born from kindness. It's born from contrast. The contrast between safety and mystery, between being seen but not owned, between closeness and distance. The man who awakens desire knows how to create that balance. He can make her feel safe in his presence, but never in control of it. Ethan, from earlier, tried to win with constant attention. Adrian tried to win with endless support. Both killed desire, but Caleb, he won with stillness, with the quiet confidence of a man who could hold his frame no matter what. That's why his silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like gravity. So, here's the shift. Stop treating interactions like auditions. Stop asking yourself, did she like that? Stop bending yourself to be chosen. Instead, move like you already know your value. Not above her, not beneath her, but untouchable. Because the men who awaken desire don't move to be liked. They move to be felt. Let me give you a sharper picture. She tries to provoke you with a joke. You smirk. She compliments your intelligence. You nod once and change the subject. She tests your patience. You breathe and answer with less than she expected. Not because you're playing games, but because your self-control is stronger than your need for approval. And in that moment, the dynamic flips. She begins to lean in, not to be entertained, but to be understood. Not to feel safe, but to feel something real. So, ask yourself, how much of your energy is spent on proving you're enough? How often do you explain when you should pause? How often do you comfort when you should hold stillness? Because the man who awakens desire doesn't need to prove. He doesn't need to fill every silence. He doesn't need to be predictable. He just needs to remain unmoved. And here's the beautiful irony. When you stop chasing her attention, she starts chasing yours. When you stop asking, "Do you like me?" with every smile, every text, every gesture, suddenly she's the one asking, "Why do I care what he thinks?" That's the moment desire is born. Not in comfort, not in endless approval, but in the tension of not fully knowing. So, today, practice this. Hold one pause longer than you normally would. Let one question go unanswered. Breathe through one test without flinching. and watch how the room shifts. Because the men who awaken desire don't win with noise, they win with gravity. And that gravity doesn't come from words, it comes from presence. The irresistible anomaly. Most men don't realize how predictable they are. They flatter, they agree, they share their stories too quickly. And deep down, they believe this makes them trustworthy. But here's the colder truth. The more predictable you are, the faster you vanish from her mind. Because desire doesn't grow from what she understands. It grows from what she can't fully explain. And the man who breaks the pattern, not to seek attention, but simply because it's who he is, doesn't just attract her curiosity. He hijacks it. Nathan was 32, an architect. Sharp eye, quiet confidence, the kind of man who noticed details but never announced them. At a birthday dinner with friends, he met Ella. She was radiant, magnetic, used to being the center of every conversation. Every man at that table was eager, expressive, feeding her attention. But Nathan? He didn't play along. He asked one question, then listened. He smiled faintly, but didn't force laughter when the room erupted at her joke. When she teased him, he raised an eyebrow and stayed silent, and that silence unsettled her, not because it was rude, but because it left her with no script to follow. He wasn't resisting her. He wasn't trying to be mysterious. He just wasn't performing for her. And that changed everything. Later that night, she leaned closer and said, "You're hard to read." Nathan didn't blink. He just said, "Most people say too much." That was it. No smile, no explanation, just calm, measured presence. And Ella laughed, not casually, but nervously, because that laugh wasn't amusement. It was her ego scrambling to cover the discomfort of not being in control. You see, the female ego thrives on knowing it can move a man. It thrives on predictability. But the moment it meets someone who doesn't bend, who doesn't rush to please, who doesn't explain every silence, it panics. And that panic is the birthplace of obsession. Because when a woman can't fully read a man, her mind keeps returning to him. Not out of choice, but out of compulsion. That Machiavelli once wrote, "Men are driven more by the fear of losing what they don't understand than by the joy of receiving what is easily given." That's the law Nathan lived by without even knowing it. He understood that if you reveal too much too soon, you become common. But if you remain calm, composed, and slightly unclaimed, you become unforgettable. Think about it in your own life. Which people have stayed in your memory the longest? The ones who explained every detail, every thought, every feeling? Or the ones who left you wondering what they were thinking, what they truly meant, who they really were? The mind doesn't obsess over answers, it obsesses over questions. And that's what Nathan gave Ella, not clarity, but curiosity. The more she searched for his validation, the more valuable his silence became. The more she tried to pull him into her orbit, the more she felt herself revolving around his. And that shift, it changed the entire dynamic. Because Nathan wasn't talking like a performer. He wasn't trying to win. He moved like a presence. He invited mystery. He was composed, not cold. And in that space, Ella began asking questions she hadn't asked herself in years. Why hasn't he reacted? Why do I care? Why is he still in my head? That's the power of being an anomaly. Most men believe honesty is what earns trust. And yes, honesty matters, but only when it's earned. What actually creates attraction isn't full disclosure, it's selective restraint. Every detail Nathan withheld didn't make him deceptive. It made him more captivating, because he didn't try to prove he was worthy. And that made her want to prove that she was. Here's the shift you must understand. The less you explain, the more power you hold. What if not answering her question is the very thing that keeps you in her head? What if mystery isn't weakness, but the strongest form of influence you have? Because the moment you stop chasing validation, you start commanding attention. And here's the paradox. Ella had been surrounded by men her whole life who bent, who praised, who explained. She forgot them within days. But Nathan, he didn't ask her to like him. He didn't ask her to understand him. And that absence of need became a presence she couldn't ignore. So, today practice this. Say less than you normally would. Let silence linger where you'd usually explain. Withhold one detail you'd normally reveal. not to manipulate, not to play games, but to remind yourself of this truth. Your presence isn't proven by words, it's proven by composure. Because when you're unpredictable, not erratic, but calm and unreadable, you stop being one of many. You become the anomaly, the exception, the one who doesn't just pass through her memory, but anchors inside it. From servant to presence. Most men believe that being caring, thoughtful, and endlessly supportive is the surest way into a woman's heart. They imagine loyalty will be rewarded. They imagine generosity will be reciprocated. But the harsh truth, to her subconscious mind, every act of predictability feels like ownership. And what the ego believes it already owns, it no longer desires. That's why the emotional servant never becomes the object of obsession, only the object of convenience. Lucas was 34, worked in UX design in Seattle. He was the kind of man every woman claimed she wanted, gentle, kind, emotionally available. When his colleague Anna went through a breakup, he became her lifeline. He texted back within minutes. He checked in before every meeting. He even brought her coffee, just because. She smiled, she thanked him. She opened up about her job stress, her past, her fears. And Lucas thought this was connection, but what he didn't see was the slow shift in her gaze. One day, after hours of back and forth texting, he sent a message that was just a little more direct. "I've really enjoyed talking to you lately. Just wanted to say that." She left it unread. The next morning at work, she was polite, but distant. During lunch, she laughed louder with someone else. And when Lucas offered to walk her to her car, she shook her head with a soft smile. "Thanks, but I'm good." That one sentence, ordinary on the surface, landed like a quiet verdict. Not because she was cruel, but because something had ended before it even began. Here's the painful truth. Lucas had mistaken access for intimacy. She didn't crave him, she used him. Not maliciously, not consciously, but because he made himself too available, too fast, too fully. He gave all of himself before she invested even a fraction. And when you give what hasn't been earned, it isn't received as love, it's received as excess. Availability without edge isn't attractive, it's invisible. This is where men confuse empathy with weakness. They think being endlessly present makes them irreplaceable, but what it really makes them is predictable. And predictability doesn't create obsession. It creates labels: friend, helper, brother figure, the one she can always lean on, but never fully want. Think of it this way: when someone hands you everything without you lifting a finger, do you treasure it, or do you take it for granted? That's what happens when men rush to comfort, to fix, to soothe every emotion. He becomes her therapist, her safety net, her free emotional labor, but never her desire. The shift begins when you stop trying to be her solution and start becoming her presence. A presence is not desperate. It does not collapse under her emotions. It listens, but doesn't chase. It feels, but doesn't drown. It sees her pain, but doesn't rush to erase it. Because presence is strength under pressure, and that is what the subconscious mind respects. Here's the paradox. She may say she wants endless support. She may say she wants a man who is always there. But what she actually craves isn't unlimited access. It's measured access. She doesn't want someone who disappears, but she also doesn't want someone she can predict with every move. She wants the man who can be there, but not be owned. That's what separates the servant from the presence. Imagine this. She's venting about her day, and instead of rushing to fix everything, you listen, you nod, you let her words settle. And then, you don't scramble for solutions, you don't spill reassurance, you let a pause exist. In that pause, something changes. She feels your steadiness, she feels your calm. And that calm doesn't say, "I'll do anything for you." It says, "I can stand here without losing myself." That's power. Lucas thought giving more would make him unforgettable, but it made him replaceable. The man who creates presence doesn't give everything away. He knows power isn't in what you offer, it's in what you withhold. Because what's withheld creates curiosity, and curiosity keeps the mind coming back. So, here's the lesson. Stop being the servant who tries to prove his worth through endless generosity. Start being the presence who lets his silence, his posture, his restraint speak for him. Let one problem go unsolved. Let one question linger unanswered. Let one moment of silence stretch a little longer. Not to play games, but to prove something to yourself, that you can hold the frame. Because when you hold the frame, she feels something far stronger than comfort. She feels respect. And here's the paradoxical reward. When you stop rushing to prove you're valuable, your value multiplies. When you stop throwing your energy at her without measure, she starts chasing it. When you stop being the servant, you finally become the presence. And presence is unforgettable. Speaking to her ego. Most men think they're talking to a woman, but they're not. They're talking to something colder, sharper, more powerful, her ego. Every pause, every glance, every reaction you get. It's not just her speaking. It's her ego interpreting, filtering, deciding whether you are worth her attention. And unless you know how to speak to that part of her, you'll keep wondering why your best efforts fall flat. Michael was 36, a high-performing sales director in San Diego. He was confident in the boardroom, composed under pressure. But when it came to women, he always left confused. He wasn't needy in obvious ways. He didn't beg for attention. He didn't flutter with compliments. But he made one subtle, fatal mistake. He softened himself every time he spoke. He over-explained his opinions. He repeated himself to avoid misunderstanding. He smiled at the end of sentences, just to make sure they landed well. He thought he was being considerate, but to her ego, it was weakness wrapped in polish. It was a man silently asking, "Is this okay? Do you still like me?" And every time she felt that flicker of uncertainty in him, something in her pulled away. One night, during a casual dinner, he made a thoughtful point about relationships. She paused, looked at him, and said, "You don't have to work so hard, you know." She smiled, not kindly, but knowingly. In that moment, he froze. Because deep down, he knew what she had just seen, his need for acceptance. And nothing kills desire faster. This is what most men don't understand. It isn't your words that matter, it's the energy beneath them. If your energy says, "Please like me," then no matter how clever, thoughtful, or articulate your words are, her ego will hear only one thing: weakness. And the ego doesn't crave weakness, it craves sovereignty. Machiavelli once wrote, "The appearance of control is more powerful than the truth of vulnerability." That's what most men get wrong. They think showing every raw emotion makes them authentic. But authenticity without restraint doesn't create attraction. It creates predictability. Women don't chase emotional servants. They chase sovereigns. The man whose words are measured, whose emotions are visible but not spilled, whose presence doesn't ask for validation. It demands awareness. Because the ego doesn't respect what comes easy. It fixates on what doesn't fold. Think about the last time someone responded in a way you didn't expect. Maybe slower, maybe sharper, maybe with silence. Didn't your mind hang on it longer? Didn't you replay it later, wondering what they meant? That's how the ego works. It's not logic that lingers, it's tension. And tension is born in the spaces you don't rush to fill. Michael realized this too late. He had been articulate, polished, even impressive, but never untouchable. And untouchable doesn't mean distant or arrogant. It means unmoved. A man who can listen without collapsing. A man who can speak without apologizing. A man who can hold silence without losing himself. That man speaks directly to the ego. Here's the shift. Stop trying to be understood. Stop trying to soften your edges. Stop explaining yourself until there's nothing left to decode. Instead, let mystery do the heavy lifting. Because mystery bends perception. It makes the ego lean in, not out. When you stop trying to earn her understanding, you create something far more powerful: curiosity. Michael finally practiced restraint. He stopped sending long messages just to maintain presence. He stopped explaining every mood shift. He let pauses breathe instead of rushing to fill them. And something strange happened. Her responses sharpened. Her questions deepened. She leaned in, not because he had done something clever, but because he had finally stopped doing what every other man does. He stopped chasing her ego, and her ego started chasing him. So, ask yourself, when you speak, are you leading the interaction, or are you softening yourself just enough to stay acceptable? Do you speak like a sovereign, or do you speak like a servant in disguise? Here's today's practice. Leave one message unanswered longer than usual. Don't justify the delay. Say less. Hold the tension of silence longer than you normally would. Watch how people lean in, not to hear better, but to decode what you're not saying. Because influence isn't about being louder, it's about being less available. And here's the final key. When you learn to speak not to her ears, but to her ego, you stop being forgettable. You stop chasing connection. You start commanding curiosity. You stop performing. You start creating presence. And presence doesn't just attract, it dominates.